Namaste. I am Vijaya Vishwanathan from Infinity Foundation and happy to have with us today Dr. Ravishankar from Hyderabad. Dr. Ravishankar, welcome, and it's so lovely to have you.
Hey, Namaste Vijayaji. Thank you very much for having me here. I'm so happy to be really here.
So, there's a very interesting background that Dr. Ravishankar brings to the table. He is a board certified cardiologist and also a practitioner of Ayurveda. So, he brings in very different perspectives. And he also, I might add, is a data scientist. What led you to Ayurveda? How did you discover Ayurveda and what was your journey like?
Oh, yeah, thank you very much. A small correction, please. I'm a cardiac surgeon, actually.
Okay.
So, my journey into Ayurveda started about 28 years ago when I was doing my medicine. I was in the third year of my medicine. And several questions suddenly sprung in my mind. We were able to understand the body in parts, but we were not able to integrate it and understand the body as a whole. That was one thing that really missed in the curriculum. Even now, that's a big problem, actually. It was not only then. It's not that we have understood the body as a whole now. No. That's the second thing was we were looking at the stats from the WHO. Even now, you know what? 15% of the diseases only are cured. The rest of the 85% are just, 45% of the diseases are assume a chronic stage, and 40% of the diseases we don't even know why they even occur.
You have a set of chronic diseases that you manage, so to speak, and 25% of the disease are the diseases that you cure.
15, yeah.
And the rest you don't
15
know.
we cure, 45
15,
we
okay.
manage the rest of the whole life. 40% of the diseases we keep trying. We don't know. Etiopathology unknown. We don't know why they even occur. So, like diseases like multiple sclerosis, autoimmune disorders, we don't know why they occur actually. So that is the second thing that really intrigued. Out of all the advancements, we still have a lot of scope to improve. Another one was the pharmaceutical drugs themselves. That really scared me out really, because I always wanted to be a good doctor, but when I looked at the side effects of literally all of the drugs, all of the drugs have one or two benefits, and 60 to 70 side effects, and death being one of the side effects sometimes. And I was doing a lot of research in Russia. Another thing that in the history of medicine we were taught was that the first physician for the modern era comes from India, and his name is Charaka. I didn't even know who Charaka was at that time, actually.
I don't know if the American system teaches that, but it's interesting that the Russian system acknowledges.
It does. Russian system does teach. When I
Charakacharyas
asked
contribution.
yeah, absolutely. When I asked my friends in India those days, I said, we don't know who this is. It was really crazy. And then the first surgeon they mentioned in their own history books, books of history in Russia, mentioned that the first surgeon comes from India again, and he did plastic surgery. And one of the most advanced forms of mesh graft technique is already mentioned in Sushruta Samhita. We all know that there's something called good cholesterol and bad cholesterol, right? So the good cholesterol is high density lipoprotein. The bad is the LDL, the low density lipoprotein. What we found was there are 24 different fractions of low density lipoprotein, which means there are 24 different forms of LDL, of bad cholesterol. And 21 to 24 forms, 21 to 24 were the only ones that were being even now are being targeted by the statins, a class of drugs that lower your cholesterol. What is why did those 24 forms occur, and what is the fate of the rest of the 19 forms of cholesterol when you are giving a patient this drug called statin is not known. So I pretty much understood that there's a lot of things that we don't know yet. And then came the real bomb that when you even now when you go to a doctor, as in physiology we all were taught that there's something called homeostasis or homeodynamics, as Rajiv ji calls it. I love that expression, because there's nothing static. Everything is in dynamic state of equilibrium. So he calls it homeodynamics, and I think we should call it as homeodynamics. So when the books, the Guyton's Physiology mentions that when the body is in a state of homeostasis, the body sets itself into a self-healing mode and cures itself. But the problem is we don't know the parameters of homeostasis. What does it mean? If you go to a doctor, if you're diagnosed as a diabetic, your doctor would order a test called blood glucose and HbA1c, which is the glycated hemoglobin, which is an average of 3 months of your glucose. And interestingly, American Endocrinologists Association sets the higher target of HbA1c at 5.5. The American Diabetic Association sets it at 6.5. American Gerontology Association sets it between 7 and 8. And American College of Physicians sets it at around 8. So which one do you follow? Which one is right for a certain individual? Not that any of these associations have done some wrong research or their numbers are wrong. All these numbers are supported by data. So why did they get different sets of data? And how do we manage my patient? I mean, if a certain patient comes, what number is normal for him is a big question for me. And the same goes with cholesterol. One of the studies, the Hunt study, in which they investigated about 67,000 of thousands of patients who were put on statins. At least patients above the age of 60, about 92% of them, that's a very big high confidence interval, 92% of them developed new forms of heart failure. You give a drug to save the heart and it causes new forms of heart failure. It could cause a liver failure. It is causing interstitial tubular necrosis leading to renal failure and rhabdomyolysis. Muscles, get disintegrated. I mean, there's so many. There's a lot of scope. When I was taught that, it is Yanna Bharate, Tannuna Bharate. That's what Swami Satyasai Babaji. I studied in his school, so he used to tell us, Yanna Bharate, Tannuna Bharate. There's nothing outside of India that you have to know, because everything is there in India. That's what Bharat, and not India, but the Bharat. He talked about the Bharat. So that pushed me into reading our own ancient scriptures. That's how my journey started into learning Ayurveda, the original Sanskrit versions.
Okay, let me ask you this question then. So the way we understand Ayurveda is there are two things that differentiates the Ayurveda drishti from the Western perspective. Now, one is that Ayurveda looks at the prakriti of a person and gives prescriptions and solutions based on the prakriti. So it's a custom solution, for a particular individual. Yeah. So that's one, as opposed to the Western system where there's one medicine for the disease as opposed to for the person, for the individual, as opposed to for the individual. Sure. Now, so that is one point. The second perspective is that Ayurveda, there could be countless COVIDs and bacteria and other things that attack you from the outside. And you can't predict all of them because it's literally infinite. And so through dinacharya, you then try and keep your defenses up all the time. Make sure your defense mechanisms are all in good shape. So as opposed to chasing after a disease, like how we are now waiting a whole year for a vaccine. So the better strategy, Ayurveda looks at this whole problem as, okay, you follow some basic guidelines and make sure your immune system is in good shape. Now, in your practice where you're doing both Western cardiac surgery and things like that and Ayurveda, how do you straddle this lens? What lens do you wear at what point, and how do you come up with solutions?
You touched upon a very fundamental thing, that Prakriti has to be assessed, and there's something called Vikriti again. Right. So what do you stick to? Whether you stick to Prakriti or Vikriti, and then what are they actually? So all this boils down to a certain concept in Ayurveda called as the homeostasis or homeodynamics. Sushruta Maharshi in the Sutra Sthanam, he mentions Sama doshaha, sama agnishcha, sama dhatu malakriya, prasannatma manasendriyanam swasthya vidhiyate. What Maharshi is saying in this verse is that swasthya vidhyate, your body can restore its health and also regenerate tissues continuously. When does that happen? That happens when there is something called samadoshaha. When the doshas, in Ayurveda, there are certain three agents called as the vata agent, the pitta, and the kapha agents. When these three agents are in equal proportion in all of the sapta dhatus are 7 tissues and 42 organs, then the body sets itself into self-healing motion, self-healing machine, literally, and leads to prasanna atma, prasanna manas, prasanna indriyas, and that leads to swasthya. So this is how beautifully health is described in Ayurveda. So the key here is measure or quantify the doshas. You have to, at any point of time when a patient approaches you, the first thing that if you don't quantify the doshas, individual vata pitta kaphas in individual organs, you cannot diagnose a patient and you wouldn't know how to bring about a balance. So that's the first thing that you need to assess. So Prakriti is a certain Vata Pitta Kapha fingerprint, which involves the proportions of Vata Pitta Kapha in individual organs at the time of the birth. So Prakriti is, according to me, even according to the Sutrasthanam, is not a measure of your health. No. Prakriti is a predisposition. You don't maintain Prakriti all through your life. You try to bring about a VPK balance. So because, Prakriti, for example, if someone's Prakriti has led to a certain congenital heart disease, you don't maintain the heart disease, right? You cure it. So ultimately, the Maharshi, again, the Ayurvedic fundamentals ask you to go back to Samadoshaha. That's why, again, Charaka Maharshi in the Chikitsa Sthana mentions Dhatu Dusha Samatvam, he mentions, which means you need to measure the individual doshas in individual dhatus, and dhatus are tissues, all the 7 tissues. You need to bring about a samatvam or balance of these things. So the idea of homeostasis in Ayurveda revolves around measuring these individual vata pitta kaphas in individual organs, quantifying them, and then using appropriate foods, appropriate exercises, including your pranayama and also your personalized herbs to bring about a balance. That is how, in this context, yes, what you said is right, that you need to customize every medicine, everything. There's nothing called, you don't go by a disease based approach. Ultimately, the fundamental concept is you have to arrive at dhatu dosha samyam by quantifying the vata pitta kaphas in individual organs. That's the key here. Once you do the diagnosis properly, you'll be able to arrive at a custom medicine properly. So the second part here, where are we failing? We are talking about antibiotics in the allopathic field of medicine. Are antibiotics mentioned in Ayurveda? Yes, they are mentioned. Rasendra Sarasangraham chapter 2 mentions 4 types of chemicals that are used against these worms and krimis. They're called as the krimignas, kriminashini, kriminirodhini, and kitamardhini. What are they? Krimignas, antibiotics. Kriminashini, aseptic. I mean, the sanitizer that we're using, they kill the microbes outside of the body. When you want to kill the microbes inside the body, then you use antibiotics. These are aseptics. There's something called antisepsis, kriminirodhini, and then there's something called as a ketamardhini. Is a class of drugs, class of chemicals that are used to kill worms. See, these are anti-worm infestations. And beautifully, even today in the allopathic medicine, we only have 4 types of chemicals that are used against these krimis. But what Charaka Maharshi and also Sharangadhara Maharshi and Bela Maharshi mentioned, and of course Sushrita Maharshi, because he was the one who was dealing with infections all the while. What they mentioned beautifully is that 99% of times you don't need krimigna class of chemicals. Krimignas are antibiotics. He says why? He says that your body is composed of 90% of microbes. Krimis intrude into your body to an extent of 90%. And today, after all the research that we did, now we know that we are, like, as human beings, on an average, a 60 kilo individual has about 10 trillions of human cells, 90 trillions of microbes.
Microbes, yeah, and how they affect the mind. I mean, yeah, there's research on how that affects the mind, how that affects psychology, all of that. Yeah.
Actually, I would say the other way. It's the Vata Pitta Kapha that affect everything else, that decide what kind of microbes that are going to stay. So what, at least, the point that I'm trying to drive here is that we have mastered, the immune system has actually mastered the technique of uh, living with these microbes in a healthy way, in a mutually beneficial way, which in scientific terms we call as a symbiosis. We are living together with a mutually beneficial effect. Say, for example, E. coli, these are normal common bacteria that live in the gut, and they produce, selenium 4 plus is naturally not possible.
And what is the benefit of this selenium?
So the E. coli are giving what you get for about $7 a gram, you're getting for free every day. And then there are certain bacteria which actually cause disastrous diseases like rheumatic heart disease, also live in your body. Staph aureus and beta streptococcus are bacteria that otherwise would have caused serious heart diseases, are actually living in your in the throat, in the airway passages, and they produce certain, Staph aureus, for example, produces a lot of keratins, and they're good for your, metabolism of the eye. So you what in a symbiotic environment, what the body is trading off is it's giving the food necessary for these bacteria. The bacteria in turn are giving a lot of antioxidants, vitamin B1, B2, B3, B5, B7, B6, B9, B12 are all coming for free for us. So Charaka Maharshi, all the Maharshis have opined that, you don't use antibiotics left and right. It's the immune system that is actually governing this symbiosis, because of which the bacteria are provided certain caves that in the intestine they call as the Peyer's patches. There are certain immune patches across the body, which are literally clusters where bacteria could actually grow and thrive and live. So these are their colonies. So the body has provided them. And it's when the immune system, lowers its guard because of various factors. There could be environmental factors or foods, or various factors that lower the guard of your immune system. That's when the bacteria start. These are called as opportunistic bacteria. I mean, they're rightly termed as opportunistic. Why? Because while they get food, as long as the immune system, the police guys, watch and they behave well. But the moment the police guys, take off some time to
lose their
take
guard,
some
right?
rest, actually lose their guard, these bacteria start reproducing. They reproduce themselves, increase in numbers, go beyond these Peyer's patches, start attacking the bacteria. I mean, start attacking the tissues around, and then do a lot of messy things around.
Go where they're not supposed to go.
Yeah, where they're not supposed to go. And then, in my experiments, what I saw was, see, the immune system. Okay, what I did was, see, because we just mentioned in the beginning of our discussion, I just mentioned that it's very, very important for an Ayurvedic physician to actually diagnose the quantities of Vata Pitta Kaphas in individual organs and then arrive at treatment methodologies, right? So the problem here was the quantification method, and I will make a revelation today. According to me, there are just few dozens of people who actually practice Ayurveda. Unfortunately, in India and world over, people are practicing herbal allopathy. They're not practicing Ayurveda. Why I said herbal allopathy or herbal medicine is that they're like, assuming that the modern understanding of disease-based approach is superior to what is already written in the scriptures. People are have started working on disease-based approaches even in Ayurveda, which is actually not Ayurveda.
Right. Essentially, what you're saying is they identify a disease from like the Western system, and then instead of giving a
Exactly.
Western medicine, they just give you a herbal replacement instead. But the philosophy of the medicine is the same.
Yeah, the philosophy of the medicine is the same right now. That's what is being institutionalized.
I want to tell our viewers that we have a show and tell by Dr. Ravishankar in just a few minutes, where the other part of what we wanted to mention about you is the fact that you've actually taken Ayurveda and modernized it in some ways by coming up, being the inventor, and coming
Right.
up with medical devices
Yes.
to
Yes.
diagnose. So diagnostic devices, I think for the very first time, we have
First
seen
time. Yeah, absolutely.
that I have at least seen, where Ayurvedic techniques are used for diagnosis. So please, talk about what you have come up with.
I'll have to quickly mention about the research that went into, in quantifying these doshas. See, because I
Mhm,
figured out from the original scriptures that, the translations are also not really very, very good. Why? Is because Sanskritam is a very advanced, has got a very advanced syntax. See, every language has around 1500 to 2000 Sanskrit, grammar rules. But Sanskritam has 200,000 grammar rules,
mhm,
classified in 9 different libraries. In Indram, Aindram, Sandram, Shakalam, Shakadainam, Kasakrutsnam, Paniniyam, Saraswatam, Kaumarakam. These are the 9 sets of grammars of Sanskrit. So Maharshi Patanjali, when he wrote the Mahabhashyam, what he mentions is you have to, when you want to understand, if you want to understand something that is written in Sanskrit, you have to apply at least one principle from each of these 9 grammars to understand a matra, to understand a syllable.
mhm,
Which means if you have 2 syllables in a word, you have 9 to the power of 2 meanings. One syllable would have just 9 meanings. So that is what is lost. See, because it is a very advanced language with advanced syntax, they use that language because you could communicate more, talk less.
mhm,
So each of these shlokas, when I'm trying to decipher them into the language of natural language in Telugu, Tamil, or English, I'm having to write pages of commentaries for each shloka because the Sanskrit is so rich in its
mhm.
in the Sanskrit principles. So 200,000 grammar principles are classified in
Embedded.
9 different libraries. Yeah, 9 different
Mhm,
libraries, and each of the
mhm.
library has a certain has a certain classification as to when to use, what to use, how to use. There's a Mahabhashyam written entirely on that.
Now, we are in fact doing, Infinite Foundation is doing some work on Sanskrit non-translatables, because exactly because of this, there are so many words and usages which cannot be translated and should not be translated. So we are actually working on a Sanskrit non-translatable series, and hopefully we'll have a conference very soon on this same subject.
Oh wow, that's very innovative, and that's the right way, actually, right way. So because these are non-translatable, I'll use the word as is. So what I did was, see, because when you talk about vata, for example, there is just people have a primitive understanding that these are very primitive. Even I thought when I was reading Ayurvedic scriptures, see, vata is characterized by about 7 properties, pitta by about another 7 properties, and kapha by about another 7 properties. And then when you balance these 3 vata, pitta, kapha agents, the body cures itself. When I was reading this, I was just wondering, we were taught 7 million biochemicals. The body is composed of 7 million chemicals, and Ayurveda reduced it so, reduced this
Simplistically.
understanding, and then it
Mhm,
just so it didn't make much sense. But then when I started reading the books of biochemistry, of ancient biochemistry, I was astonished at the elaborate explanation of biochemicals mentioned in the body. I'll just quote one of the verses. One of the verses from the from the Rasendra Sarasangraham mentions Ashitischatva Laksha Rasamrutam Swastya Vidhiyate. What it means is there are 84 lakh chemicals in the body which are nectarine, rasa amrutam.
mhm,
Nectarine chemicals make up your body and maintain your health. I
mhm.
was astonished when I read this. I know how did they actually decipher these many molecules? I thought, because according to our allopathy, we have the body's. Harper's biochemistry mentions that the body is comprised of 7 million molecules, But one thing that we now know, that we are discovering 10 new molecules every day. And at that rate, the deficit of 1.4 million molecules will be discovered in the next 270 years. And not only that, see, what the rishis did was, having said that the body is comprised of 8.4 million chemicals, the rishis further, the next verse mentions Jalaja Navalakshani. Water soluble chemicals are 9 lakhs. Sthavara Vimshati Lakshani. Non-reactive chemicals are 2 million. 20 lakhs. Vimshati is 20 and Lakshani is lakhs. Gruta, which means fat reactive, fat soluble molecules are Chaturasya Lakshani, 4 lakhs. See, Vijayaji, this is amazing. You know why? This is a part of analytical chemistry. Analytical chemistry, you just have a simple bachelor's or a master's in analytical chemistry, you're up for grabs for 150 to 200K salary in the US. It's such advanced form of analytical chemistry. And here, the ancient rishis have already classified all these 8.4 million chemicals into certain groups based on its properties of solubility. They've given a solubility. If you want to understand a chemical, you need to know its solubility. And it's already given in these verses. And not only that, the rishis mention that there are, out of the 6.4 million chemicals that are interacting amongst themselves, there are 3.2 trillion interactions, chemical interactions possible, which is rasayana karshaha possible. There is something called rasayana charya, which is chemical reaction, rasayana karsha, chemical interactions. So they made a clear distinction in the Rasavadam, which is documented by Kanada Maharshi. He comes up with something called chemical reactions and demarcates it chemical interactions. Chemical interactions are van der Waals forces of attraction between different molecules and between different fundamental particles. So they've gone so deep. They mentioned, the ancient rishis mentioned that there are 3.2 trillion chemical interactions possible amongst these, and they grouped them into 21 broad categories. So they did a lot of data science because I'm a data scientist, I know that without data science it's not possible. They found 21 commonalities, 21 factors based on which they could classify all these 3.2 trillion interactions, and then 7 of these common properties, the least common properties, guide molecular pathways, and they were called as Vata. The 7 of them guide the metabolic pathways, and they were called as Pitta, and 7 of them, the rest of the 7 guide all the assimilative properties, and they call them as Kapha. That's how beautifully biochemistry is actually explained. It doesn't, Vata, Pitta, Kapha doesn't limit to just biochemistry. It extends beyond biochemistry to physiology, to physics, to chemistry, so to foods. So the Vata, Pitta, Kapha extends to even your thoughts. What is a Vata-based thought? What is a Pitta-based thought? What is a Kapha-based thought? And based on which, what are the behavioral aspects of an individual based on your VPK proportions is all clearly demarcated in Ayurveda.
So would you give an example of what are Vata-based thoughts and Pitta-based and Kapha-based
Yeah,
thoughts?
I will. I'll just tell you, because we started with the quantification method. I'll just quickly give that in 1 minute, and then we'll go to the behavioral aspects of VPK. So because VPK, understanding of Vata, Pitta, Kapha is very, very fundamental to understanding of Ayurveda. What I started off is, you have to, these non-translatables have to be translated into the language of modern physiology, modern biochemistry, modern electrophysiology. So what I did was, I was the first in the world to actually create animal models of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, and measure all that is possible, possible to measure. This was one of the first and very pioneering experiments that I did. And what we did was, the rishis, they gave a Vata, Pitta, Kapha fingerprint of all of the foods that you actually have. The herb that you have beside me, looking at the herb, I can say that it has got a Katu, Tikta, which means it's got a little aggravated Vata and a Pitta as its properties. So they gave a fingerprint of Vata, Pitta, Kapha of everything that you see around. I chose those foods that would aggravate Vata and fed them to one group of rats, and chose Pitta aggravating foods in another group. Each group consisted of 15 rats, and the third group of rats were fed with Kapha aggravating diets. And then after a month, why 1 month? Because Charaka Maharshi mentions in the Sutra Sthanam that it takes dvipaksha, 2 fortnights for effect, for translating the doshas of the food into the doshas of the individual organs. So the rasa organ, the heart is a part of him, is a so okay, well, I'll not go deep into that, but we created models of vata, pitta, kapha in experimental animals by feeding vata aggravating, pitta aggravating, kapha aggravating diets, and then we isolated the hearts of the rats and then measured electrophysiology, measured the action potentials. So what is the action potential? It's an electrical activity. Say we are talking right now, looking at each other, right? How is that happening? When I'm talking, the sound gets translated into an electrochemical message in the ears, in the tympanic membrane, and then it translates. The tympanic membrane vibrates according to the sound frequency, and then at the back of that you have a nerve plexus, and then there's a auditory nerve, the auditory receptor translates this mechanical vibration into an electrochemical message. The same thing happens on your skin, everyone, all the 5 sense organs. You have 5 sensory receptors. They convert these 5 senses, the 5 senses, into a certain electrical message. So everything in the body is translated into an electrochemical message. That's how communication happens between cells. So what we did was we isolated rats, and then my assumption was that something at the electrical activity must be changing, and we really found the electrical activity in a vata aggravated heart was different from a pitta aggravated heart and a kapha aggravated rat. So how did it differ? Vata, there's something called a resting membrane and a threshold membrane potential. When the heart is at rest, it has got a resting membrane potential. When the sinoatrial node sends electrical signals, it sets itself into, it leads to a threshold membrane potential, and then and once this threshold is reached, the heart contracts. The electrical impulse gets transmitted to every part. So in vata, what is happening? The difference resting and threshold was very less. So which means the vata rats required lesser stimuli to elicit an action potential. The kapha had larger, the difference between the resting and the threshold membrane was larger. It was 9 times higher than the vata. So they required 9 times higher stimulus than the vata. So that is why it corroborates with what is mentioned in Ayurvedic scriptures, because there is something called sthira, which means which characterizes kapha. Sthira means the system is hyporeactive. Because of the larger difference between resting and threshold membrane, the system is stabler. So that is why when you translate this into behavioral aspect, a vata individual, if someone has, say, in the substantia nigra, I mean, there's a specific part of the brain that is that leads to certain behavioral aspects. If there is aggravated vata produces more action potentials. And hence such individuals, they are able to think faster, but they cannot end up with a logical conclusion. Pitta is intermediary between the vata and pitta, vata and the kapha. So, but they are not normal. They are also spontaneously reactive. There's something else happening. They're reacting normally, but not at the expense of an electrochemical message that is being generated. There's a biochemical message that is being generated because of which they are active. In fact, actually, pitta cells, they are completely spontaneously reactive without taking any impulse from the outside. That's a specificity of the pitta cells. So to cut the whole story short, I give an example, how these vata, pitta, kapha affect your behavioral aspects. Look at the World Trade Center. When it pummeled down, there were 3 reactions. A group of people ran away from the building, helter-skelter. One group of people ran towards the building to see if they could help any survivors, Another group was literally dumbstruck looking at the building pummeling down. So the first group, which ran away from the building, they had vata possibly in their brains. So they had too many thoughts. So that's why they could not end up with any logical conclusion. They had to run away helter-skelter. The second group were Pitta individuals, pretty much. Pitta, what it translates into is it's got 5 aspects actually. The Alojika Pitta gives you a perfect analysis. You're very logical when you have Pitta in the brain, I mean adequate Pitta in the brain. And that connects to Sadhaka Pitta in the heart. Sadhaka Pitta makes you very brave. So they go with logical conclusion ki, I have to save them and I will do whatever it takes. They are like, so they have enough Bhrajaka Pitta, which gives you enough mobility. So they're very mobile, they have adequate appetite, so their body is supplied with adequate energy. So they do a logical, once they have fixed their mind on a certain specific target, they won't change the target. This is a Pitta characteristic. And the Kapha characteristics, I usually give this. I want to be non-political here, but then I give the example of Manmohan Singh ji, but it's like hyporeactive brains. You talk to them, it takes a lot of time for them to actually process that information and step into action. So that's why they just look at the phenomenon dumbstruck, pretty much. By the time it percolates into the brain, the phenomenon is over. Pretty much. I mean, that's a hyporeactive state. So that is how there is a Vata reactivity, there's a Pitta reactivity, and a Kapha reactivity. When you talk about the immune system, there could be 3 types of reactivities. There could be a Vata reactivity, or a Pitta reactivity, or a Kapha reactivity. If there is a Vata domination, or a Pitta, or a Kapha domination in the immune cells. I mean, of course, there are again 174 different types of immune cells based on the CD marking. I'm just talking about the peripheral monocytes because we did these experiments. Once we got some data from the experimental animals, we started creating models of Vata, Pitta, Kapha in immune cells, and we generated amazing data.
When was this done?
Oh, this was done in the year 2007.
And published, I'm assuming.
Yeah. No, we filed for patents. So because I knew that there are a lot of important, interesting things are going to come, and we pretty much figured out that when there is a Kapha reactivity in the immune cells, we are pretty much going to the crux of how autoimmune disorders are actually happening inside the body. What is the basis of these autoimmune disorders? So by unraveling Kapha mechanisms, we were able to unravel most of the autoimmune disorders now. We just filed all of those patents, and we're going to publish very soon.
Dr. Ravishankar, I have understood that you've come up with some very interesting devices, and I want our viewers to see and do if you could do a demonstration of these devices as like a show and tell of some of these devices that you have invented. One is a Nadi pariksha device. The Nadi pariksha itself is a lost art form and lost skill.
Right.
And you have tried to revive it by making a device out of it. And the other thing that you have done is also come up with a Fitbit, if you will, using Ayurveda principles. So if you could talk to us about both and do it. So first of all, let me ask you, why is Nadi pariksha important? And what does your device do to accomplish this?
See, Nadi pariksha is very, very important. Why? Because you need to diagnose. See, we were talking about setting imbalances of Vata, Pitta, Kapha in different organs, right? Right. If we need to set them right, we need to understand and quantify the doshas in individual organs. And you know what? There is no one method right now. Okay, people have come up with something called Nadi Tarangini. There's a instrument which is called as a Nadi Tarangini. But what they did was they correlated. I mean, they used a certain algorithm, heart rate variability as an algorithm, and they classified them into 3 different frequencies, which was not done by Nadi Tarangini itself, but then the electrophysiology studies based on cardiologists across the world did that study, and then they classified that they were able to see. I mean, they run the entire heart rate variability through a Fourier transform. They modified the data into a certain mathematical algorithm. It's called as Fourier transform, and classified 3 different frequencies: the very low frequency, and high frequency. What the inventors of Nadi Pariksha did was, because no one did this correlational studies of what is Vata and what is Pitta and what is Kapha does in the body. They have not done that. they just straight away assume that Vata means very low frequency waves and Pitta could mean low frequency and Kapha the high frequency waves, and then started correlating. But that's not right. Because how do I know it is not right? Because we created models of Vata, Pitta, Kapha and their subtypes. Vata has five types of Vatas, Prana, Apana, Vyana, Udana, Samana. There are certain properties attributed to each of these. So what we created was, we created these models again in experimental animals. And then model of Prana Vata, Apana, Vyana, Udana, Samana Vatas, and then correlated that with the frequency domains of HRV, heart rate variability. So we found this is amazing because no one could actually identify, even Fourier transformers could not actually come up with more than 3 domains, frequency domains. We came up with 15 different domains. And what we did was, we did 2 parallel studies. One, correlate Vata, Pitta, Kapha and their subtypes with the frequency domains, and correlate Vata, Pitta, Kapha and their subtypes with what is happening inside the cells, with the biochemistry, with physiology, with so that's how what is happening. We mapped these frequencies with the biochemistry of individual organs, and hence once we know each frequency is mapped, not each frequency, a set of frequencies mapped to Pranavata, for example, and Pranavata does certain things in the brain, in the heart it does different things, and we map these these functions, and thereby, by using this device, innovative technique, I'm able to map Vata, Pitta, Kapha individual organs. You just saw how we acquired the data and into this .csv file, and it takes about 10 to 12 minutes for acquiring about 20 to 22,000 data points. So once we have them here, we use this data file and generate the interbeat interval. So this is the interbeat interval file that the application generates automatically. And so you have all the data processed here, and you have interbeat intervals. It's all in milliseconds. There are about, I think, 700 data points here. Now, once you have this interbeat interval, we use this file again to run Fourier transform and arrive at the statistical measurements. So, okay, you don't go by this numbers actually, because they're jumbled up. I used a special, deceptive code to jumble this up, so that, the application is secure. But these statistical measurements are here to show you that we have generated the frequency domain measurements, the detrended fluctuation analysis, the point care plot. What we did was, we used the point care conjecture and connected that with Katyayana Sutras to arrive at the next important file, where we correlate all this data into generating a certain individual's Vata, Pitta, Kapha fingerprint. Sorry, here. This is the Vata, Pitta. On the left here, you find all the individual organs. These are the individual organs, and right beside you have so you have the Vata, Pitta, Kapha proportions of individual organs here, and that is good for an Ayurvedic physician, so that he understands what to correct in which organ, and based on this, he could actually customize his recommendations to his patient. But then for my users, the device would automatically generate this data, in which it gives a series of symptoms that you need to rule out. So it gives this list of symptoms that a patient needs to rule out, and it translates again into the language, into blood biochemistry. The first time in the world you have this blood biochemistry module. The first one, 224, is the blood glucose. 6.8 is the 3-month average of blood glucose. This 129.2 is total cholesterol. This is HDL, LDL, VLDL, and triglycerides. And then it highlights on the fitness regimen that is good for her right now, for her or him right now. It gives a list of supplements that we use in our clinic here. These are all abbreviated for my user. And it gives a list of foods. In the next tab, it gives an entire list of foods that are good for that user at this particular point of time. It gives an exhaustive list of foods to choose from, number one, and an exhaustive list of foods that are to be avoided at this time. So this is how this list of 84 foods right now. So this is the power of Dr. Polly. It gives it's a complete digital doctor assistant assisting you in choosing the right food, right exercise, and right herbal supplements with their right formulations.
Dr. Ravishankar, how is Nadi Pariksha done usually, the traditional way?
Nadi Pariksha is done with both the hands. I do it with both the hands from what I deciphered from the ancient texts. Because, the Sharangadhara Samhita, Basavarajiyam, Bhaishajya Ratnavali, there are many books written on Nadi Pariksha itself. See, in today's world of physics, Nadi is nothing but a pulse. Nadi is pulse. And when you do the Nadi Pariksha, you're actually assessing the pulse pressure curve. And the pulse pressure curve is a sinusoid graph. Actually, it's a dichrotic notch, but it's a sinusoid. It repeats again. It has got a certain rhythmicity, and you essentially try to apply differential pressures with these 3 fingers on the artery, 7 differential pressures as explained by Sharangadhara Maharshi. So you take these 3 fingers, identify the artery, and press them. Apply 7 differential pressures and with equal difference, and each level corresponds to a certain dhatu. Dhatu is a tissue. The rasa dhatu, rakta, mamsa, medha, asti, majja, shukra dhatus. So that's number 1. So you have 7 levels, 3 different fingers. Each finger again is attributed. There's you essentially diagnose vata with this finger, pitta with this, and kapha with this finger, and also you kind of essentially assess you at different pressure points. You assess the vata, pitta, kapha characteristics of the pulse. The characteristics of the vata, pitta, kapha pulses are given again pretty much straight. Now vata is attributed by sarpagati, which means it's slippery pulse. Pitta is attributed by Manduka Gati. It's a frog-like, it's bounding, it leaps. And Kapha is attributed by Hamsa Gati. It's like sluggish pulse. It makes a very harmonious waves, which is slightly sluggish. So with these, they're pretty much palpable. Anyone can master this technique. It's not a rocket science at all. Anyone can master. But then the thing is, you essentially end up with 21 data points from here and 21 pressure points from each of these hands. That makes up 42 pressure points. Each of these organs, in my research, I correlated with each of the organs in the body. So that's how, by assessing the pulse and understanding the component of each of these vata or pitta pressure kapha pulse characteristics, you assess the percentage of vata or pitta or kapha in those tissues. And then once you get the vata, pitta, kapha proportions in each of these 42 organs, what you do is you choose those foods. There's Amla again. Amla has certain active ingredients, and the active ingredients of Amla and curry leaves are pretty much, in a certain fraction are almost similar, but they don't have similar properties. See, when you go by characterizing plants based on just their active ingredients, you might find similar active ingredients in different plants, but their site of action is different. So that is what is Ayurveda beauty. That's the beauty of Ayurveda, because curry leaf has its site of action on the liver, and then the Amla has its site of action on the spleen, on the thymus, on the large intestine, in the small intestine, and on the heart and on the brain. So, but both of them have similar active ingredients in a certain fraction. So you kind of match those herbs, those foods, and those exercises that would bring about a balance of vata, pitta, kapha in individual organs. That is how extraordinarily this mapping has to be done, and that is what is Ayurveda. Ayurveda is not about, if you say, for example, if you generally say, oh, take omega-3 fatty acids, I would say no, omega-3 fatty acids would be wrong in individuals who have more vata. Because we did those experiments in, in the Johns Hopkins. So what we did was, we tested it again in Moscow State University in Moscow. We created vata models in experimental animals and fed with higher dosages of higher, within the normal limits, but higher normal range of omega-3 fatty acids. So what are the omega-3 fatty acids actually given for? They're given for correcting your heart. They're called as cardioprotective agents. But what they did to rats that had more vata, they ended up, all these rats between the 72nd and 79th day ended up with heart attacks.
Oh, wow.
See, those omega-3 fatty acids that were supposed to protect the heart are actually killing the heart. Why? Because there's nothing absolutely good and that is nothing absolutely bad. That's why, in the Bhagavad Gita, again, Lord Krishna mentions Annam Brahma, food is divine, but Yukta Ahara Viharasya Yukta Cheshtasya Karmashu, which means he's asking us to take Yukta Ahara. Yukta means that which brings about a balance is the Yukta Ahara. There's no Yukta Ahara which is a formula that is good for everyone. Yeah, you cannot have that. So this is the Ayurvedic technology. So that is how the pulse diagnosis is done, Nadi pariksha is done, and then you arrive at treatment methodologies individualized completely. The same thing applies for the herbs as well. So for example, you must have heard about Arjuna, right? Arjuna is a herb that is given as a cardiotonic. But in our experiments, if the heart, cardiotonic is that one which improves the functioning of the heart, right? But here there's a trick. If heart ends up with a certain disease, because of vata vitiation, you have to give Arjuna in the form of a kwatam. It's a water extraction of Arjuna has to be given. If the heart disease is because of pitta vitiation, you give it as a ghritam or an asavam. Ghrita is a fat extraction of the same herb, and asavam is a you choose low ethyl alcohols as a solvents to extract those ingredients, because those ingredients are necessary for a pitta vitiation that led to heart disease. If there is a kapha vitiation, use an arishtam. So you see how this mapping is actually already given in the Dravya Guna, but we are not using that.
Right, and it's a very customized, and it's extremely customized.
Completely customized, extremely customized, and advanced data science has to be applied.
So, we're talking about data science. You are a data scientist and an Ayurveda practitioner. Now, let's come to the issue at hand, the crisis at hand that's going around, which is COVID.
Right.
And being a data scientist and an Ayurveda practitioner, how are you looking at COVID and what are you proposing?
So this virus, as I analyzed, I realized that this is extremely mutative and hence is extremely contagious, and is the problem with such mutagenicity and contagiousness is that a vaccine might not be possible very soon. So we've got to actually balance the vata pitta kapha in the immune system and and have a strong immune system to be able to face this COVID situation, because I suspect that this situation is going to last for a long time. I did an entire modeling of the genomics of the COVID-19. Because it's the genes that would actually cause certain synthesis of certain proteins. We all know that genomics leads to translation of genes, leads to production of proteins, and proteins are the ones that actually are responsible for various actions of these viruses. Now, we all know that viruses actually cannot replicate on their own. They have they have their own DNA, but then the virus has to find a site to get into the host cell, and then the genome of the virus gets incorporated into the genome of the host, that is human beings, And then, whenever we reproduce, whenever the cells regenerate, the virus regenerates and then starts attacking the body. So for which, in the fundamental, I started off with analyzing the genomic databases available. Now, what I figured out was the TopMed and GoGene. There are various databases that are central repositories for scientists across the world. I pulled up all those databases. What I found was there are about 28,220 base pairs. I predicted that based on the genomics, because this is a part of translational research that I did, because I correlate Vata, Pitta, Kapha with genomics, with biochemical reactions, with physiology. So from that knowledge, what I figured out was this virus is causing a disease which would aggravate Vata and Pitta or Pitta and Vata. It's a Vata Pitta fever or a Pitta Vata kind of a fever. So that pretty much, I mentioned that initially, while the data that was available said that this virus would actually get it's a thermolabile virus is what was mentioned in the scientific literature, which means beyond 27 degrees centigrade, it's going to disintegrate. But then when I looked at the genomic databases, I said, no, it's a Vata Pitta virus, which means it is capable of, while it is thermolabile at the present state, by just triggering or triggering a certain genetic locus, it could actually become thermostable. And you know what? 2 weeks ago, French scientists had
That's what they're
actually
figuring
proved
out.
it.
Mm-hmm.
They proved it that this virus is stable. Usually what we are taught in microbiology is if you boil water for 60 minutes at 60 degrees centigrade, all bacteria would die. But this virus, some of the strains of the virus are alive even after doing this. So this is a thermostable virus. Okay, I don't want to scare our viewers by saying all these things. I'll also give certain tips as to how we can absolutely be safe from this by following certain simple tips, which everyone, they'll figure out how scientific these simple tips are. We'll talk about it towards the end of our show, certainly. But then this virus is causing a certain Vata Pitta fever. So that again, I started talking to doctors across the world. I have friends in New York, Presbyterian Hospital, in Connecticut. I had I talked to more than 17 doctors who were on the front line, actually, who were working with these patients. And I pulled up all the symptoms that these patients were actually the patients were manifesting, and I pretty much predicted all the symptoms from the genomic databases. This is the beauty of this science. When you correlate, there's non-translatables. When you create models of them and then translate that into the language of modern science, you'll again be able to remap, you'll be able to understand correlations between individual processes. So we started off saying that in the current medicine that is lacking, and today with this science I'm very confident that this virus can be nullified. In fact, because it is aggravating a Vata Pitta fever, you have to actually elicit kapha response in the individual. When you, because the logic of Ayurveda is when you bring about a balance of Vata Pitta Kapha, there is health. The body restores health. So if you bring about a kapha, mild kapha aggravation in the individual, then the Vata Pitta of the virus gets nullified with the kapha, and then the virus attains this VPK balance. The viral disease manifestations attain this VPK balance, and the disease, the body automatically will be able to restore itself. What is this virus doing? It is binding, as per the documents available, literature available, it is binding to a receptor called ACE2 and getting into the cells. But going by the genomic databases, I have figured out that, not figured out, it has to be proven. I have to do those studies yet. But what I realized that it could bind with 2 more receptors present in the body. There is a certain Pitta receptor, the vanilloid receptor. I'm assuming that, okay, I'm thinking loud. The Pitta receptor that the virus could get into. Why I'm saying is this, because if the virus gets into the body, through a pitta mediated receptor, which is a vanilloid receptor in the lungs, it elicits an abdominal response. And that manifestations of this disease. There's broadly, the disease is manifested in 3 different categories. One is in the form of a typical upper respiratory tract infection. The second manifestation is an abdominal manifestation. People come up with, in the first instance, in the first category, come up with, SOB, shortness of breath, and, they have manifestations of, in very few individuals, there is acute respiratory distress, but most of them manifest into severe inflammatory response syndrome, SIRS. It's not ARDS. And that's because, we all know now, that someone has isolated these H strains and then figured out the virus is competitively binding to the hemoglobin and making oxygen less available in the blood. And that is why when you look at the X-ray, X-ray films, chest X-rays of the lungs, you find a ground glass appearance. It's not a typical pneumonia opacity that you find. You're finding a ground glass appearance that is typical of hypoxia, mediated because of allosteric competition to, these are all too scientific, but then there's a typical manifestation of allosteric competition of binding of a moiety to hemoglobin, whereby, patients end up with hypoxia. That's one of the manifestations. The second manifestation is they're present primarily with only abdominal symptoms. They come up with bloating or pain in the abdomen and diarrhea, and there's a bacteria also associated in this. People have assumed, there are certain papers that are presented that the virus is actually encapsulated inside a bacteria and it enters with the food and causing abdominal manifestations. For that, again, it needs one more receptor to act. From my analysis. So there's another there's another receptor that I'll not be able to mention now because it has to undergo a certain test again, because of which people end up with severe fatigue. That is another manifestation. People just come to the ER with just severe lethargy. That's the only symptom. And the trick, each of these manifestations could end up with sudden respiratory distress. That is what is making this disease severely unpredictable. Who would, people, from the narration of a couple of my friends from the US, they said, we don't know who would end up with in the ICU. People who were picked up in ambulance and were admitted in the ER could become all right by evening and walk back. And people who just walked into the ER just because they tested positive on a COVID, and they suddenly could, vanish, literally. So there's unpredictability and also complications on the part of the kidney. There is a 15% kidney involvement in 15% of individuals. In about 15% of individuals, a heart involvement, and then encephalopathy. People with renal failure are ending with encephalopathies, and coagulation disorders is something that was explained to me about 4 weeks ago. Now it is picking up. People are reporting it in peer-reviewed journals. So coagulation syndromes. So why I'm saying in detail about these symptoms is all these are manifestations of Vata and Pitta. And coagulation, people could think that coagulation syndrome is because of a kapha mediation. No, it's a Pitta Avruta kapha. So this correlation is very important. It is because of exacerbation of Pitta that the body is compensatorily producing kapha. And when you give a blood thinner, the patient would die faster. Because it is Pitta already thins out the blood. Now what the body is doing to balance the Pitta with the appropriate kapha, it is producing kapha that is leading to formation of clots. This is my understanding from Ayurveda. So you should never try to reduce kapha in these individuals. Should try to maintain a little kapha. So when someone prescribes lasuna or garlic, I would say that is not a right advice.
Okay.
And if you that is why I'm coming to this physiology by understanding this from the data science perspective, from genomic perspective, and from translational research perspective. So by analyzing all this, I got a pretty fair picture of what COVID-19 is doing. And by God's grace, if I get to lay my hands on them, we'll see what happens. I made a proposal to the government of India. We went through the first level of screening. They asked me to submit a detailed clinical trial proposal, and we'll certainly post the results very soon.
Okay, but for the person at home, what would you suggest that we do?
As I mentioned, it's a Vata Pitta mediated disease. So number one is that I give everyone is a ginger tea made up of black pepper, turmeric, and ginger in a proportion of 1/4, half, and 1 teaspoon to add to about 200 ml of thick milk, 6% or more milk. Add this and boil it for about 5 to 7 minutes, and then allow it to settle down for a while. And while it is still lesser hot and a little more warm, you add honey as per the taste. This is one remedy that I would give. Number two is I ask people to, in India where there is availability, I'm asking people to take a lot of moringa soups. And I don't know if it is available in the US. Now, in the US, people could try with neem leaves. Take about 100 grams of neem leaves or neem powder, add it to about 500 ml of water, boil it until it becomes 400 ml. Take about 2 tablespoons thrice daily. That does a lot of good for, along with ginger tea. Number two. Number three is a Vata Pitta pacifying diet. There are certain foods that would pacify Vata and pacify Pitta. Better to have food that would actually that are common for both Vata and Pitta. These are certain charts available already, so people can look at those charts and then customize their dietary needs.
For example, what would that be?
No raw food, nothing. I mean, none of the salads. Boil food always. Have boiled vegetables. Some people think that having raw food is always healthy. No, it will aggravate Vata. So Vata food is slightly oily, slightly or too heavily oily, warm, and very less spicy. Pitta food is very less oily, and you need to have enough proteins and carbs in Pitta food, because Pitta consumes a lot of glucose. So you should not restrict glucose levels. I mentioned, right, that you need to increase kapha. Kapha is add fats, add more short chain carbs like rice. White rice will be really good for such individuals. I can give a list of foods for your viewers. I can give an entire, because it's an exhaustive list actually.
We can post it if you can give it.
Yeah, sure. Whoever is interested. So another important thing, we just mentioned hypoxia is a major concern in these individuals, because suddenly people become hypoxic, and they're 80% of them are getting admitted with low oxygen levels in the blood. Usually in the blood, the oxygen saturation should be anywhere above 100%. But if the saturations come down to 92 to 93, you start feeling severely hypoxic. That's where people are getting admitted. And when they go below 85 to 84, 82, then it's going to be severely hypoxic, and then tissues won't be able to resist those low oxygen levels, and they essentially die of alkaline necrosis of the tissues. So which means hypoxia, because of its competitive binding to hemoglobin of the virus particle, is not allowing oxygen to get into the blood actually. So how do you cope up with that? I mean, all this, apart from this, before even going to this particular remedy, I was talking, to counteract hypoxia, there are two important things that Ayush has posted on its website as well. There's a oil pulling technique with ghee, and also Nasyam technique. You actually add, put 1 or 2 drops into each of the nostrils, and then make sure that there's a oil lining formed, because the key, the trick here is, the logic here is that the virus, outer layer of the virus is a fat. when you have a mucosal lining with abundant layer of a fat, the fat dissolves in fat, and then the virus
Dissolves.
becomes inactivated. Right. So that's how you inactivate the virus. That is a very, very valid suggestion. I suppose, and everyone should definitely have it. But if the virus gets into the body, I'm sure that there's nothing to panic. Definitely, because panic, will further cause hypoxia. The problem here is hypoxia. You have to cope up with hypoxia. There's an excellent and a simple technique of coping up with hypoxia. We did these experiments. Simple stretches. Naukasans and your Surya Namaskars has enough stretches. So what happens when you stretch the muscles? Because most of the yogasanas are, they essentially ask you to, the yoga practitioners ask you to stretch your body and then stretch as much as possible. Why? Because when you stretch the muscles, there's something called stretch receptors that get activated. And stretch receptors in the muscles, when they get activated in a 7-chain reaction, it's something called ischemic preconditioning that gets triggered. And what ischemic preconditioning means is that ischemia is for hypoxia. Low oxygen levels is ischemia. Preconditioning is adaptation. What the body does is it gets adapted to low levels of oxygen, and the body will be able to maintain normal metabolism in spite of low oxygen concentrations. And we did these experiments in experimental animals by stretching their muscles, holding it up to about 45 to 60 seconds, and then observing what happens. You know what? These animals were able to bear oxygen levels up to 35% and still be normally functioning in the blood. Yeah. So this is an excellent remedy of why this particular yogasana is very, very important. You're essentially will be able to survive even very low oxygen concentration. So apart from this, because this is again a Vata Pitta based fever, while everyone does their yogasanas, what I would ask people to do is increase the influence of the Chandra Nadi and decrease the influence of the Surya Nadi. How do you do that? Breathe in from the left nostril, hold the breath for a while, and then breathe out from the right nostril. So the proportion should be breathing in breathing in and holding the breath and breathing out should be in 1:4:2. If you're breathing in for 1 second through the left nostril, hold the breath for 4 seconds, breathe out through the right in 2 seconds, in 1:4:2. Do this for 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes in the evening. Your Vata and Pitta get balanced, and then the virus possibly gets nullified.
Do you think the age for Ayurveda has come? Do you think Ayurveda, Jyotisha, and some of our Indic sciences are going to be tapped into more and more to solve major problems as we go forward?
See, today, COVID-19, put Ayurveda and allopathy at the same level. This is an extraordinary opportunity for Ayurveda. Under the able leadership of Modi ji and scientists motivated by polyscientific Ayurvedic approach. Why I say polyscientific here, you need to have a mastery on Ayurvedic scriptures, and you need to have a understanding of what these concepts mean in the language of allopathy, and then you need to properly translate that into data and then convert them into algorithms. It's an advanced form of mathematical biology. If you apply this mathematical biology in the current scenario, I see we can really level Ayurveda with allopathy, or if not, take allopathy, help allopathic doctors take the next leap. I'm very confident of this happening around.
Thanks so much for your time and your tips, and we hope to see you soon, and we wish you all the very best in and a lot of success in your scientific work.
Thank you very much, Vijaya ji. I'm so happy to be here, and my pranams to Rajiv ji.
Thank you for watching. You can subscribe here and also hit the bell icon to make sure you get notified. To donate, please click this button.